In this exciting story, you will see a defeated captain and a ship heading towards an inevitable tragedy. But everything has a beginning. Let me tell you how it happened. The night was cloaked in darkness, pierced only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the roiling clouds overhead. Detective Sarah Kane stood on the deck of the Coast Guard vessel, her hair whipped by the fierce wind as she braced herself against the railing. The air was thick with tension, the urgency of their mission palpable as they cut through the churning waters. "Status report!" Kane barked, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. Around her, the crew scrambled to secure loose equipment and batten down the hatches in preparation for what lay ahead. "We're closing in on the distress signal, ma'am," came the response from the helmsman, his voice strained with effort as he wrestled with the controls. "But the storm's making it difficult to maintain our course." Kane nodded grimly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the outline of the cargo ship Endeavour loomed ominously. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, knowing that lives were at stake and every second counted. As they drew nearer to the stricken vessel, Kane could see the chaos unfolding on its deck. The crew scrambled to secure loose cargo and rig makeshift barriers against the onslaught of wind and waves. But despite their efforts, it was clear that they were fighting a losing battle against the fury of the storm. "Prepare to board," Kane ordered, her voice firm and decisive. "We need to assess the situation and offer whatever assistance we can." With practiced precision, the Coast Guard vessel maneuvered alongside the Endeavour, the two ships rocking perilously in the tumultuous seas. Kane gripped the railing tightly as she made her way across the narrow gangplank, her heart pounding with adrenaline as she stepped onto the swaying deck of the cargo ship. The scene that greeted her was one of utter chaos. The air was filled with the shouts of the crew and the clatter of equipment, punctuated by the deafening roar of the storm. Rain lashed against Kane's face, stinging her skin as she surveyed the damage wrought by nature's fury. "Captain Kessler," she called out above the din, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "I need to speak with you." At the sound of her voice, a figure emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by the driving rain. It was Captain Victor Kessler, his expression grim and determined as he made his way towards her. "What's the meaning of this intrusion, Detective?" he demanded, his voice tinged with anger. "We're perfectly capable of handling our own affairs." Kane met his gaze with steely resolve, unflinching in the face of his hostility. "With all due respect, Captain, this is no ordinary storm," she replied. "And I fear that the safety of your crew and your cargo may be in jeopardy." Kessler's expression softened slightly at her words, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. But before he could respond, a deafening crash echoed through the night air, reverberating through the hull of the ship like a death knell. "The bridge!" Kane's heart leapt into her throat as she realized the gravity of the situation. Without a moment's hesitation, she turned on her heel and raced towards the source of the sound, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. As she reached the bridge, Kane's worst fears were confirmed. The cargo ship Endeavour was adrift in the midst of a stormy sea, its fate hanging in the balance as it teetered on the brink of disaster. And standing at the heart of it all was Detective Sarah Kane, her resolve unshakable as she prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their desperate race against time. The relentless roar of the storm echoed through the night as Detective Sarah Kane stepped onto the deck of the Coast Guard vessel. Rain lashed against her face, mingling with the salty spray of the sea as the ship battled against the churning waves. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the darkness with jagged bolts of light, casting eerie shadows upon the water below. Ahead, the silhouette of the cargo ship Endeavour loomed large, its towering frame swaying ominously in the tempest. Kane felt a surge of adrenaline course through her veins as she prepared to board, the urgency of the situation driving her forward. She tightened the strap of her rain-soaked jacket, her resolve steeling against the howling wind. As the Coast Guard vessel drew alongside the Endeavour, Kane's gaze swept over the chaos unfolding before her. Crew members scrambled across the deck, their movements frantic and disorganized as they battled to maintain control of the ship. The sound of shouted commands and clanging metal filled the air, a cacophony of chaos amidst the storm. With a steady hand, Kane grasped the railing and leaped across the widening gap, landing with a solid thud on the rain-slicked deck of the cargo ship. She took a moment to steady herself, the wind whipping through her hair as she surveyed her surroundings. The scene before her was one of devastation, the ship's structure groaning under the strain of the raging sea. Moving with purpose, Kane made her way towards the bridge, her boots splashing through puddles of rainwater as she navigated the treacherous terrain. As she approached, she was met by Captain Victor Kessler, his expression strained beneath the flickering glow of the emergency lights. "Detective Kane," Kessler greeted her, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "I assure you, everything is under control." Kane's eyes narrowed as she studied the captain, sensing the underlying tension in his voice. She could see the beads of sweat glistening on his brow, his hands clenched tightly around the railing as if trying to anchor himself against the storm. "Is that so, Captain?" Kane replied, her tone laced with skepticism. "Because it certainly doesn't look that way to me." Kessler's facade faltered for a moment, his eyes flickering with uncertainty before he regained his composure. "We've encountered some unexpected difficulties," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "But rest assured, we're doing everything we can to rectify the situation." Kane nodded, though she remained unconvinced. She knew there was more to the story than Kessler was letting on, and she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. With a curt nod, she dismissed the captain and turned her attention to the task at hand. The storm raged on around her, but Kane remained undeterred, her focus unwavering as she prepared to delve into the heart of the mystery aboard the Endeavor. The cargo ship Endeavor creaked and groaned as Detective Sarah Kane started to navigate its labyrinthine corridors. Every step echoed with a sense of foreboding, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows against the rusted walls. Kane's senses were on high alert, her keen eyes scanning for any sign of tampering or sabotage. She approached a door marked Engine Room, the metal cold beneath her fingertips as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and machinery, the hum of engines drowning out all other sound. Kane moved with purpose, her footsteps echoing against the metal grating as she surveyed the damage. There, amidst the tangled wreckage, she spotted it. A frayed wire, its copper strands exposed like veins pulsing with illicit energy. Kane knelt down, her gloved hands careful as she examined the evidence. It was clear now, this was no accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the ship, but the question remained, who? As Kane continued her investigation, she encountered the crew members one by one, each offering their own version of events. Some were cooperative, eager to assist in any way they could, while others were more guarded. One crew member in particular caught Kane's attention, a young deckhand named Miguel, his hands trembling as he recounted the events leading up to the crash. His story seemed genuine, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps something more sinister. Kane pressed him for details, her voice firm but not unkind. Miguel hesitated, his gaze darting nervously around the room before finally meeting hers. And then, in a rush of words, the truth spilled out. A secret meeting in the dead of night, whispered conversations in darkened corners, a plan set in motion long before the storm ever hit. With each revelation, Kane's resolve hardened. She would not rest until she uncovered the truth behind the sabotage and brought those responsible to justice. But as she delved deeper into the mystery, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. That beneath the surface lurked a darkness far more sinister than she could ever have imagined. Detective Sarah Kane stood firm, her gaze locked with that of Captain Victor Kessler, a man whose steely resolve matched the tempestuous sea raging beyond the fractured hull of the Endeavor. The air crackled with tension as they faced each other on the deck, the storm casting shadows that danced across their determined faces. "You can't continue to deny what's happening here, Captain." Kane's voice sliced through the howling wind, her words laden with conviction. "There's sabotage at play, and I intend to uncover the truth." Kessler's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into icy daggers as he met Kane's unwavering stare. "You've no right to accuse me or my crew of such treachery," he retorted, his voice a low growl that reverberated in the tumultuous air. "We've weathered worse storms than this without a scratch." But Kane refused to be swayed by Kessler's defiance. She had seen the signs, the subtle hints of tampering, the whispers of dissent among the crew. She knew that beneath Kessler's facade of confidence lay a darker truth waiting to be revealed. "I'm not here to engage in a battle of egos, Captain." Kane's voice remained firm, her resolve unyielding. "I'm here to ensure the safety of everyone aboard this vessel, and that includes uncovering the source of this sabotage." Kessler's nostrils flared with barely contained anger, his fists clenching at his sides as he struggled to maintain his composure. "You've overstepped your bounds, detective," he spat, his words laced with venom. "This is my ship, and I'll not have you meddling in my affairs." But Kane refused to back down, her eyes ablaze with determination. She knew that the stakes were too high to succumb to Kessler's threats. Lives hung in the balance, and she would stop at nothing to ensure their safety. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Captain." Kane's voice held a steely edge as she squared her shoulders, readying herself for whatever came next. "But mark my words, the truth will come to light, one way or another." With that, Kane turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Kessler seething with rage in her wake. The storm raged on, the clash of wills between detective and captain echoing across the tumultuous sea, a harbinger of the battles yet to come. The air aboard the Endeavor was thick with tension, palpable like the crackle of electricity before a storm. Detective Sarah Kane moved through the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps echoing against the metal floor. Every step brought her closer to the truth, but also closer to danger. As Kane delved deeper into her investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows danced in the flickering light, playing tricks on her mind. But she pressed on, guided by determination and a thirst for justice. The cargo hold loomed before her, a cavernous space filled with crates and containers. Kane's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at her. She moved cautiously, mindful of every sound and movement. With each step, Kane's heart pounded in her chest, a steady drumbeat of anticipation. She knew that what she would find here could change everything, could expose the dark underbelly of the smuggling operation that had brought the Endeavor to its knees. Finally, she reached the back of the hold, where a series of crates had been stacked haphazardly. Kane approached cautiously, her senses on high alert. With a deep breath, she reached out and pried open the lid of the nearest crate. What she found inside took her breath away. Rows upon rows of contraband goods lay before her, neatly packed and hidden from prying eyes. Kane's mind raced as she took in the scene before her. This was no ordinary cargo shipment. It was a carefully orchestrated operation, designed to evade detection and line the pockets of those involved. But as Kane examined the crates more closely, she realized that there was more to this operation than met the eye. Hidden compartments concealed additional contraband, more valuable and dangerous than anything she had seen before. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the illicit goods, her fingers tracing the contours of the hidden compartments. She knew that she had stumbled upon something big, something that could bring down the entire operation and expose those responsible. But even as she reveled in her discovery, a sense of unease gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. She was not alone down here. Someone was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kane's senses screamed danger as she whirled around, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. But the shadows remained still, silent sentinels guarding their secrets. With a heavy heart, Kane realized that she was not safe here. Cameras everywhere. She was being watched. She had uncovered the truth, but now she would have to fight to survive long enough to see justice served. As she made her way back towards the surface, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The storm raged on outside, a fitting backdrop to the chaos that threatened to consume them all. But no matter what lay ahead, Detective Sarah Kane would not rest until she had uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy and brought those responsible to justice. For on this dark and dangerous night, the fate of the Endeavor and all who sailed aboard her hung in the balance. Detective Sarah Kane stood in the dimly lit cargo hold of the Endeavor, her flashlight cutting through the shadows like a beacon of truth in the darkness. She meticulously searched for clues, each step bringing her closer to unraveling the mystery that had brought the cargo ship to its knees. As Kane moved through the maze of crates and containers, she couldn't shake the feeling of being continuously watched. Every creak of the ship seemed to echo ominously in the silence, heightening her senses to the danger that lurked in the shadows. But she refused to let fear dictate her actions, pushing forward with a determination born of years spent chasing down criminals on the high seas. Her instincts led her to a secluded corner of the hold, where a stack of crates stood ominously in the darkness. She hesitated for a moment, steeling herself for whatever she might find hidden this time. With a swift motion, Kane pried open the lid of the nearest crate, revealing again its illicit contents. Only this time it was made of remains of meat. Upon looking closely, she was able to recognize some parts that could be human bodies. Kane's breath caught in her throat as she realized the magnitude of what she had uncovered. But there was no time to dwell on the implications. With a sense of urgency, Kane called for backup, her voice crackling over the radio in a desperate plea for assistance. She knew that she couldn't tackle this alone, that the forces arrayed against her were too powerful for one person to overcome. As she waited for backup to arrive, Kane surveyed the scene before her, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was behind this smuggling operation, and how deep did the conspiracy go? The answers eluded her like shadows dancing on the edge of her consciousness, taunting her with their elusive presence. But Kane was not one to back down from a challenge. With a steely resolve, she set about cataloging the contraband goods. And yes, also those that contained human parts, meticulously documenting each item for evidence. She knew that this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But she also knew that she had a duty to uphold, a responsibility to see justice done no matter the cost. As backup finally arrived, Kane felt a surge of relief wash over her like a wave crashing against the shore. With their help, she would unravel the truth behind the smuggling operation, no matter how deep the rabbit hole went. For Sarah, the hunt was on, and nothing would stand in her way. The air crackled with tension as Sarah Kane stood face to face with Captain Victor Kessler on the deck of the Endeavor. The storm raged around them, echoing the tempest of emotions swirling between the two adversaries. Kane's gaze bore into Kessler's, searching for any hint of guilt or remorse, but all she found was defiance etched upon his weather-beaten features. "You can't hide the truth forever, Kessler." Kane's voice cut through the howling wind, her words carrying the weight of conviction. "I know what you've been up to, and it ends here." Kessler's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched in stubborn defiance. "You have no proof, Kane. Just wild accusations and baseless suspicions." But Kane refused to back down, her resolve as unyielding as the steel beneath her feet. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a handful of incriminating evidence, laying it out before Kessler with deliberate precision. "Is this not proof enough for you, Captain?" Kane's voice was steady, unwavering as she watched Kessler's expression falter for the briefest of moments. "Your lies end now. It's time to face the consequences of your actions." A tense silence enveloped them as Kessler struggled to find a response, his gaze flickering between Kane and the damning evidence before him. But before he could formulate a reply, a commotion erupted from the shadows behind him. "Captain, we've got incoming!" One of the crew members shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Kane's senses went into overdrive as she scanned the deck, her instincts screaming a warning. Suddenly, figures emerged from the darkness, armed and ready for a fight. It was clear that Kessler's loyalists were prepared to defend their captain at all costs. "Stand down, all of you!" Kane's voice cut through the chaos, her gun drawn and aimed squarely at Kessler's chest. This ends now, but Kessler's resolve remained unbroken, his gaze meeting Kane's with a steely determination of his own. "You think you can stop me, detective? You're just one woman against an entire crew. You don't stand a chance." Kane's heart pounded in her chest as she stared down the barrel of her gun, the weight of the situation bearing down upon her. She knew that she was outnumbered and outgunned, but she refused to give in to fear. For the sake of everyone aboard the Endeavor and the countless lives at stake, she had to stand her ground. With a deep breath, Kane squared her shoulders and tightened her grip on her weapon. "I may be just one woman, Kessler," she said, her voice unwavering, "but I'm not alone, and I will do whatever it takes to see justice served. Come on, you have been related to smuggling activities. I've even found boxes with remains of human bodies. I don't know how long you've been doing this, and honestly, I don't care either. But you can tell your men to put down their guns because we have sent a notice to the Coast Guard, and they are on their way. We can get out of here dead or alive, but the truth is that I don't see it looking good for you." Captain Victor Kessler was amazed at the detective's bravery and decided to put down the weapon and order his men to do the same. As the storm raged on around them, the standoff between Detective Sarah Kane and Captain Victor Kessler reached its climax. In that moment, the fate of everyone aboard the Endeavor hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of a knife, and only time would tell which way the scales would tip. Detective Sarah Kane and her Coast Guard team prepared for their final push against the looming threat. With each passing moment, the weight of their mission pressed down upon them, urging them forward into the heart of danger. Kane stood at the helm of the cargo ship, her gaze fixed on the storm-tossed sea beyond. The night sky was a canvas of swirling clouds illuminated intermittently by flashes of lightning that danced across the horizon like spectral apparitions. The ship rocked and groaned beneath her feet, a steady reminder of the perilous situation they found themselves in. Around her, the crew worked feverishly to secure the vessel, their movements a blur of activity against the backdrop of chaos. Every clang of metal against metal, every shout of command, served as a grim reminder of the race against time they were engaged in. "We need to move fast," Kane called out to her team, her voice cutting through the cacophony of sound. "We can't afford to let them slip through our fingers." Her words were met with a chorus of grim nods as her team sprang into action, each member knowing the gravity of the situation they faced. With practiced efficiency, they leave the guns and split into smaller groups, each tasked with a specific aspect of the operation. Kane led the charge, her senses sharpened by the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to push forward, to keep pressing on despite the obstacles that lay in their path. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the ship, the tension thickened like a suffocating fog, wrapping around them like a vice. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the conspiracy, closer to the true truth that lay hidden beneath layers of deception. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the corridors, piercing through the darkness like a dagger. Kane's heart leaped into her throat as she raced towards the source of the commotion, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. When she arrived, she found her team engaged in a fierce struggle with members of the crew, their faces contorted with rage and desperation. Kane waded into the fray, her fists flying as she fought to gain the upper hand. The minutes stretched into hours as the battle raged on, each moment bringing them closer to the edge of oblivion. But Kane refused to back down, refused to let the darkness swallow them whole. Finally, with one last burst of effort, they emerged victorious, their adversaries subdued and defeated. Kane stood amidst the wreckage, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she surveyed the scene before her. Finally, the captain and his workers understood that the detective was very serious and was willing to do anything to uncover his smuggling plot. His anger and threats did little to scare the Coast Guard, and he knew that could work against him in a possible trial. He had been caught and had no choice but to give up and start looking for a really good lawyer. After a full night of fights and tension on board, Detective Sarah Kane stood on the deck of the Coast Guard vessel, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the first light of dawn began to break through the darkness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm sea and a sense of eerie tranquility that belied the chaos of the night before. As the crew worked to secure the cargo ship Endeavour and tend to the injured, Kane's mind raced with thoughts of everything that had transpired. The confrontation with Captain Victor Kessler had been intense, each word exchanged crackling with the tension of a battle fought on both physical and psychological fronts. Now, as she watched the sunrise, Kane couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The smuggling operation had been thwarted, the perpetrators apprehended, and order restored to the chaotic seas. But amidst the wreckage and the debris, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within her. She had faced death head-on, stared into the abyss of human greed and desperation, and emerged on the other side, changed but undeterred. The weight of her responsibilities as a protector of the sea pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to buckle under the burden. Turning away from the horizon, Kane made her way back to the command center of the vessel, where her team awaited her report. As she relayed the events of the night and outlined the steps they needed to take moving forward, Kane couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell within her. They had faced insurmountable odds and emerged victorious, proving once again that courage and determination were the most powerful weapons in their arsenal. But as she looked around at the weary faces of her colleagues, Kane knew that their work was far from over. There would always be storms to weather and battles to fight, but as long as she had her team by her side, Kane knew that they would prevail. Together, they would continue to stand as guardians of the sea, protecting the innocent and upholding the principles of justice and integrity. As the Coast Guard vessel sailed towards the safety of the harbor, Detective Sarah Kane stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the horizon ahead. For in that fleeting moment between darkness and light, she knew that redemption was not just a destination to be reached, but a journey to be embraced with every fiber of her being. And with that realization burning brightly in her heart, Kane steered onwards towards a future filled with hope and possibility.